Welcome to the first, hopefully of many, Mercury Research Hour online research forums brought to you by the Kepler Conference and Canaveral Research. I'm Courtney, and sitting beside me about 500 miles away is Glenn Mitchell. Isn't technology amazing? So we're glad to have him here, and we want to welcome everybody that answered the call and came in on a Sunday morning to talk about research astrology. Now that's dedication. And I want to, in opening, kind of clarify what we're doing, because obviously there's a lot of changes going on here at Canaveral Research, hopefully changes for the better. And we're rolling out a lot of new programs and, expanding what we've been trying to do all along, which is, significantly raise the profile of research astrology that, in the short term and the long term, I think benefits everyone in the field and benefits the field in and of itself. So, it sort of made it up as we go along for the last couple of years, starting especially with the Kepler conference and the online research forums. And we're going to a larger program. So I'm going to go to my my screen share here quickly, and I think it's a larger program, and we're kind of rolling it out in bits and pieces. So I just want to present it to you in a larger sense, so you can maybe get your heads around it a little better now that we actually understand it a little bit better. Okay, so let me just go to the screen share. All right, I hope you guys can see what I'm showing on my screen. I'm sure you've gotten these emails from us, or you might have seen something on social media about this, but we're rolling out a whole new membership program, and it's actually an expanded research education program. And there's been such a demand for education and astrological research. And again, we've been wrestling with that for the last couple of years. That, what's the best way to do this? What's the best way to deliver it? And where are people at? What do the people in the field genuinely need in order to progress? So, it's all been a work in progress. At this point, this is where we're going with it. We're actually pretty excited about it. So it's going to give everybody a lot more choices, more value, and we're focusing in part on the online research forums. It's such a great platform to bring people together and allow them to talk and appear on camera and talk with each other. And we really want to encourage that. I think that's one of the hallmarks of our program, is that we do really keep it interactive and friendly. And you can meet a lot of people that way. I know I go to a lot of webinars, and you're just muted and kind of in the corner. Maybe you can send a chat message, and I get bored with those really quickly. So I like having a platform where people can genuinely meet each other and genuinely join into a real conversation. So as part of that, we've got now an expanded schedule of online courses that all feed into the overall research education program. So on that schedule, we now have the Tuesday night astrology research team that Mitch is leading, and that's a very exciting project. That'll be the first and third Tuesdays, and that's a chance to learn hands-on basics, fundamentals of astrological research, and also get involved in actual research projects, which is one of the best ways to learn, and also to do something really useful as you're learning. That's important. Then for people who can't make that, or maybe their schedule interferes, you can come in at the end of each month on the fourth Sunday morning in this format, the research hour, and we'll try to recap and pull things together and do a little review, and especially take people's questions, and give you a chance to bring your concerns or the stuff that puzzles or delights you to the table, and we can all engage in that. And then, of course, we're still doing the online research forums, and those are the first Saturdays of the month at 12:15 Eastern. So that's something that more of the European people can join in, as well as the people in North America. The next one of those will be Saturday, October 6th, and that's going to be more of the East meets West. That's been a really exciting program for us, where we get top Vedic and top Western astrologers to come in and wrestle together to solve astro quiz questions, and then really try to compare and analyze the differences in their methods and compared to the kind of results they're getting. It's very, evidence-based, but it's also, really friendly and fun and sociable. And I have to say, the Vedic astrologers have stepped up in a big way. They've taken this on with such enthusiasm, and they're bold. They're ready to be tested. They're ready to put their predictions on the line. So I have to challenge the Western astrologers at this point, because we're not seeing quite as much enthusiasm from them, and that's interesting in and of itself. So that's a challenge. I hope you'll join us that first Saturday in October, and then we have several more scheduled throughout the year, along with the regular online programs. As part of the membership, you'll also get significant discounts on our other events, like the Kepler conference or Gokulan Day. We hope to start publishing stuff next year, so members will always get a special discount on any other thing. And we've also upgraded our bi-monthly newsletter, and I think this is an important point. We're trying to the best that we can to coordinate the articles and links that we include in our newsletter with the research education program, so that everything kind of stays pulled together around particular topics, and we can move forward together. So this month we've started with a series of articles on astronomical versus astrological effects. And that's a really good starting place for studying research for so many good reasons. So we've included a lot of material on that, and we'll go over some of that today. And then as we move into October, by popular demand, we're going to be looking closely at many of the astrological research software programs that are available. And Mitch is going to be going over their different features and comparing and contrasting them. So that's the big picture of what's going on. And as we're rolling it out and getting all the pieces in place, and there's a lot of moving pieces, we're offering it for free to everybody to come in and try it out. And it's kind of our beta test, to use an old term. But then eventually it's going to go to, I think, a very reasonable price, $65 a year, $12 a month, and we'll go from there. And also on the schedule, we do have breaks, like holidays, in the programming schedule, because I know it can get to be a grind after a while, not just for us, but even for the students. So we take a break in December and January, a holiday and Kepler conference break. But have no fear, we will broadcast several sessions from the Kepler conference for members, so you'll have plenty to do in January. Then we start up again with the same schedule in February and go into the summer through June. We'll take a summer vacation break in July and August and start up again in September. So that's the basic game plan. That's what we're doing here, and that's what this is all about. And I, again, really appreciate all of you for getting up and coming in this morning. So I want to just stop briefly and ask if there's any questions or comments on any of that I just covered. because I'd be happy to take that now. And also, don't forget the Kepler conference in January. Come on down. The party's on. Now, if everybody's good with all of that, then I'm going to get on to some of the content that we've been covering this month on the astrological and astronomical frequencies. And again, if you have any questions or any comments, shoot us a little message in the chat box. And, you know, we're very happy at that point. We can put your mic on, we can put your camera on and bring you in, you know, to actually talk with us about it. In fact, we're all about that. Okay, so don't feel shy about interrupting what's going on. So we've been looking at this idea of astronomical versus astrological frequencies, and the first thing that comes to my mind, and Mitch, you can jump in at any time, is that very often when people start doing research, you know, they'll suddenly notice that they have a bunch of charts that all seem to be showing the same thing. You know, they all have like Mars and Virgo and Leo and very little Mars and Aries, and wow, that must be significant. It must be some kind of astrological effect. But it's strictly astronomical, and the only reason they don't know that is they don't understand what the astronomical frequencies or distributions are. And they're just starting with the idea that, well, it's all equal. There's 12 signs, they should be evenly distributed. Technically 12 signs, but they're not. It's not even close. So I want to start off actually with just a short video that that I did for Maurice at OPA, the Organization of Professional Astrologers. And I just give a brief intro to the problem and to the history of the problem, you know, because people have been trying to do astrological research for, you know, in the modern era, at least a century now, and really we can go back much further than that. So a lot of these mistakes have already been made many times over, and I think it's important that we don't keep reinventing the wheel. So we'll look at some of the historical context of that. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to go to my screen share and roll that video. I want to actually look at some real simple research and give you some ideas of how we fool ourselves and how to kind of open our minds about that. And I'm going to start with just some of the history of astrological research, because a lot of people early on made a lot of simple mistakes that we need to be aware of. And I'm not trying to pick on anybody or make fun of them for making mistakes, but one of the first astrological researchers was a French guy named Paul Chouinard. And he was a really accomplished astrologer. But he didn't really understand statistics, and he published a lot of research. He was particularly not looking at the astronomical effects, and this is really important. For instance, he attributed great significance to superior people having more rising signs near Virgo and Libra rather than near Pisces and Aries.
What's superior people?
Well, I guess he was looking at eminence. People who had, you know, had high levels of success. I don't want to try to define that. Okay, yeah, no, but that's what that. But the point is, the reason he saw this preponderance of rising signs near Virgo and Libra had nothing to do with astrology. It was an astronomical distribution. It's simply because in the northern hemisphere we have signs of long ascension and signs of short ascension, and you need to know that coming in. That basically in any sample of data that you've got, you're probably going to have more people with Cancer to Sag rising and less people with Capricorn to Taurus rising. And that has nothing to do with astrology. It's an astronomical distribution. And if you don't know that coming in, you can get really excited about something that you see in a chart that has nothing to do with astrology. And again, we already made these mistakes. We don't need to keep reinventing the wheel.
However, if you see a predominance of the lower rising sign in a certain category, then you do have a point.
That's a really good point. As a matter of fact, Alan Anand just posted this on Facebook today. He was promoting the Kepler conference, and he used this. And somebody chimed in the comments and said, in my family, everybody's got Aquarius rising. And I thought, that's very interesting. Because, if you have a data sample and actually most of them have Aquarius or Pisces rising, you really should pursue that. Because that's anomalous. And that's worth following up on. But again, we're not picking on Paul Chouinard. He was a pioneer. He did a lot of good work. But again, people have made these mistakes for us. We need to be aware of them. Gokulan studied Chouinard. And in looking at these mistakes, I want you to try to imagine 1,000 years in the future when astrologers are looking back at us and laughing at how silly we were. Okay, so I'm not trying to put anybody down. I'm just trying to point out that, again, they're stepping stones. Yes, and believe me, they will be laughing at us in the future, and I hope they enjoy it.
We have a note in the text from John. He says, a query on rising signs. If you compare by modality, the issue of times of rising signs balances out. All fixed signs in one day is the same time as mutual and cardinal signs. And I correct me if I'm wrong, John, and I'm going to put your mic on. Particularly, I'm trying to put your mic on. I think that unmuted it.
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in your work where you're using the rising signs of horse races, that's a little different from a birth demographic, which is what we're considering with the signs of long ascension versus signs of short ascension. You're doing, real-time analysis at the start of horse races. So I think that's a different kind of mathematical problem of itself. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, I agree, but dependent upon the research, there is a way of balancing out those different rising signs if you compare by modality rather than by individual sign. So depending upon somebody's particular interest, you may find that rather than being confused between Libra rising and Aries rising, then you start balancing it out as cardinal signs, then all of a sudden those differences,
they're going to balance out. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, because it's like one half of the zodiac against the other, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, I think that has implications, because if someone, maybe is trying to do some kind of a quantitative study on rising signs rather than just considering individual rising signs, maybe they would want to consider pairs of signs.
Yes.
And then you would get that balancing out effect.
Yes. Yeah, it's something we're familiar with when we've looked at this before in our own local astrology group. But once you start balancing it by modality, all of a sudden you can compare mutual signs with cardinal signs, and that fluctuation then balances it, it disappears. But again, it just depends upon the research, I suppose. But I just thought it was worth mentioning that there's a way around that particular issue.
Hey, no, that's a really good point. And in fact, I think, and Mitch, feel free to chime in at any time, I think that's the really creative part of research, is that there's always a way around it. You have to acknowledge the problem in the first place, and be aware of it to acknowledge it, to get to the way around it. So, it is possible to do quantitative work in rising signs, as long as you understand
up front what the problems are, and then the creative work.
Quite. Okay, thank you.
No, thank you for bringing that up. And again, as Maurice brought up in the video, if you're looking at a sample of a particular population and you find that, you know, most of them seem to have Aquarius rising or Pisces rising, then in fact, the astronomical distribution works in your favor, you know, if you actually find something anomalous. But if what, you know, the whole point is that if what you're finding is consistent with the astronomical distribution, please don't rush it into print, because the skeptics will eat you for lunch, and it's bad for everybody, you know, and unfortunately there's still too much of that going on out there. Now,
but you could balance that out between Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere comparisons, and that would also balance it out.
That too, because obviously in the Southern Hemisphere, that distribution is reversed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way around it. And this again is the creative part of research, is controlling for the variables, whatever the variables are that must be controlled. There are all kinds of solutions and really creative, fun ways that you can control for them. So that's a big part. And you know, honestly, for me, that is the fun part. I find research very creative, because you have to get up pretty early in the morning to come up with solutions to some of these problems. But when you do, it's very satisfying. So yeah, yes, thank you for those ideas. You know, that's really valuable stuff. Now, another
my question.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitch.
Yeah, my question for John would be, why not use a control group in order to compensate for the long ascension versus short ascension signs?
That's another option.
It is another option. How random is the control group? That's
as random as you want. I mean, it depends on how big you make it. And this is something that we talked about a lot on Tuesday night, is the use of control groups. And again, there's that word control. How do you control for the variables? Well, one of the ways you control is by generating a control group that is going to show what the actual expected frequencies of your factors should be.
Yes.
What the random distribution would be, and then you compare your sample to your control group to see what the differences are. And if there are very significant differences, then that helps establish the validity of the effects in your sample. Now, control groups, there's been a tremendous amount of progress in using control groups in astrology, and as we get into November, we're going to be looking more at methodologies, and we'll bring in some of Kiosti's work. He and John Rui have done remarkable things with bootstrap and shuffling in control groups, and in just basically taking the birth data of your sample and shuffling it in a random manner, you know, switching birth times, switching birth dates among the different entities in the sample.
Yes.
And then doing it like 10,000 times, so that you have a really comprehensive control group that shows you the exact, you know, expected frequencies, the exact random distribution that you would be seeing if there's, you know, no astrological effect. And it makes a really effective control group. And I mean, Kiosti is, you know, published like a dozen peer-reviewed papers using.
Would the control groups have to be random? Because if you're doing examples such as rising signs or planets in particular signs, then particularly in this northern latitude where I'm based, you're going to have a preponderance of Libra through to Capricorn rising people compared to the other signs, and they're always going to be, as you said in the other part of your publication, or certain signs where Mars is going to predominate and where Venus is going to predominate. So almost invariably, the random sample people are going to have those same tendencies as well.
Yeah. Now, when you say shouldn't it be random, again, this is an important question, because you have the option of using control groups that consist of actual people. For instance, say you use the Gokul professional data. It's in professional categories, so maybe you're going to compare the artists to the military men, and there you're using the military men as a control, say, on any effects you find in the artists, and you're using a control group of of real people, which is kind of random, and it's not that complete, but it's it's useful. Whereas when you get into the shuffling method, again, you're doing it like 10,000 times, so you're creating control groups for the same time frame as your birth data in your sample. And so if you've got 20,000 charts within that, you can call it random, but what you're really getting are the actual astronomical frequencies, the actual distributions.
Which is what you want.
Which is what you want. And in fact, we're doing a nakshatra project right now where we're testing the Gokul professional categories on the nakshatra, the Indian lunar zodiac. And I went ahead on Jigsaw and just generated we call them control groups, but they're strictly astronomical frequencies for each planet for the specific time period of the sample that we're using in each professional category. Say, the military men, for example. Yeah, I think they're almost all men. Okay, the Gokul data is terribly biased, at least in that category. It has births, say, from 1799, and then one or two in the early 1800s, but starting about 1820, they're coming fast and thick all the way up to, and there's probably, like, let's say there's 5,000 in there, and the latest birth in that category is like 1923. Let's say December 1923. So to generate our control group, I'm going to take the beginning date and the end date, and then generate, 10,000, 20,000 random charts within that. Or even Jigsaw will do it at standard intervals as well, which is even better. And you have to do that, because if you look at something like Saturn in particular, with a roughly 30-year orbit, where it stops and starts in that time frame can have an effect on its distribution through the charts, is expected distribution through the charts in that time frame, along with its retrograde periods and its perihelion and aphelion, which really slant the Saturn distribution towards the end of the zodiac. You're going to have a lot more Saturns there just for astronomical reasons, but also for the time frame. If Saturn has gone through a particular one sign 4 times, but it's only gone through the next sign 3 times, then you're going to see a difference as well. So these are some of the things that we deal with in control groups. But again, you can just use real people for a control group. That's fine. It's not always easy to do. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. But you can also use, shuffling and bootstrap, or just astronomical distributions, depending on the problem you're trying to solve.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, did we explore that in enough detail yet? Anybody want to talk about the control groups anymore? I wanted to actually go to...
Well, there is one point before we move on. Courtney, and that is what you want is you want the control group to be as representative of the population as it possibly can be.
Yeah, that's the point.
That's it's not a purely random selection unless you have all of the the population in front of you, then you do a random sample from the entire population. But the way in which a classical experiment does control groups and randomization is people are randomly assigned to the study group or to the control group. They either get the treatment or they don't. But when we're doing a quasi-experimental design like the astrological studies, then the control groups that we use are drawn from the astronomical data, as you say, so that what we want to be able to find is whether or not there's a significant difference between the finding in our study group versus what we would see in the control group. Is it different enough that statistically that we conclude that there's an effect?
Yeah, that's the point. That's the whole point right there, you know. And always bearing in mind that the skeptics are coming at us with knives. Yeah, I mean, I'm totally serious. Don't underestimate that. And guys, if you check the score, like for the last couple of 100 years, they're winning. Okay, we stink. Okay, so we have a lot of catching up to do. But you know, so if you're going out in the name of astrology and you're putting studies out there and you're not even looking at this stuff, please don't. You know, because they already know how bad we are and they're telling everybody. So we have a lot of catching up to do. And on that point, I also, in the monthly list of articles, included this great paper by Didier Castille. And I strongly recommend that you read anything that he publishes, and he's got quite a number of papers online on the Cure website, including some great studies on solar effects, on marriages and deaths. This particular paper that I sent the link to, and I'm going to bring up here on the screen share in a minute, is just a close look at French demographics. He's from France, and he went to their National Statistical Bureau and got the birth data of the entire French population from a particular point to a particular point, and I think it's almost a century. It's in the article. We'll see it in a second. And then he was able to generate the planetary frequencies of the French population, and it's fascinating. On the one hand, it shows us some of the standard astronomical distributions and what some of the problems are there that again you need to be aware of as an astrologer. You know, even if you're not doing research, even if you're just reading charts, you know, there's a chance you could be misinterpreting this stuff if you're not using astronomical frequencies. But it also, his results also show us something about the French population, because you know there's going to be some differences between, say, the French population distributions and an American population distribution. And sometimes they're subtle and sometimes they're striking. And I think this raises some interesting astrological questions. And before I go to the paper, which I'm going to do in a second, I want to raise an interesting astrological question, because, you know, it's very fine that I'm sitting up here saying, yes, if you're seeing this, it's an astronomical effect. It's not an astrological effect. You know, I'm not convinced that's entirely true. And let me explain what I mean. When we're looking at the standard distribution, say, of the rising sign, okay, that's an astronomical reality, but you know what it's manifesting is an astrological reality. It's manifesting that in the Northern Hemisphere, we're living in a culture where more people have Cancer rising and Leo rising and Virgo rising than people with Pisces rising and Aquarius rising. Now, yeah, it's due to astronomical effects, but what is the existential effect? How does that manifest? What is that saying about our culture and our society? I hope you catch my drift. You know, that's another question for another class, maybe 20 years from now. We got some stuff to get out of the way first, okay? But again, when I'm saying we do see some differences, we see between, say, a French distribution and an American distribution. And you know what? Apart from the astronomical reality of it, astrologically, that is a little interesting. All right, so let's go to Didier's article, and I'm going to, again, put up my screen share. I want to go through this with you just so, you know, each of you can at least have a starting point of some working familiarity with the standard distributions, at least within a French population. And in the article, he starts with the sun. And right away, as he points out, and I hope everyone's seeing this, he says the French people are born as the sun was transiting from Pisces to Leo. They're more numerous. What he's pointing out, and I hope you can see my cursor, is that there's a lot more French people born. This is the sun. When the sun is moving from Taurus through Leo, and in fact from Pisces through Taurus to Leo, a lot more people born then than on the other side of the zodiac. And of course, there are seasonal variations here. There's seasonal reasons for that. You know, babies do tend to be born in the warmer months and conceived in the colder months when people are indoors. And, you know, that's kind of what this graph is saying. But what's interesting is it's a little bit different from the distribution that you see in North America, where you're going to see the biggest spike, not in Taurus, but more from Cancer to Leo through Virgo up to about here, early Libra, and then it drops off. And that North American distribution is pretty well established. So you see right away, there's a little bit of a difference between the North American population and the French. The French are a bit more Taurian, and that's interesting. But again, every region is going to have a certain solar distribution due to seasonal factors, due to cultural factors. And you need to be aware of that. It's not a flat distribution, so you can't just assume that, you know, there's going to be an even number of sun signs in any population. The differences, in fact, between the sun signs are very intriguing. Now, the moon is a little bit different. And here, Didier doesn't really have much of a moon sign because the moon actually gives you just about the flattest distribution of any of the planets. In other words, the moon is pretty much evenly distributed among births because of its orbit and the time that it spends in each sign. So that's useful if you think about it. If you've got a sample and you're seeing, you know, any, you know, big spikes or big dips in the distribution of the moon through the zodiac signs, you might want to pursue that because all other things being equal, the moon should have a reasonably even distribution through the signs. Okay, so yeah, keep that one in mind. The moon's a pretty good thing to research. That's one of the reasons we're doing the nakshatra right now. Let's look at some of these other planets because he's got them all. Mercury is not evenly distributed at all. I'm hoping that you can see this graph here, and as you can see, it's very lopsided. Very lopsided, and the reason for that is you know, the famous Mercury retrograde. phenomenon. Not only does it, make you have to go back and do things over and, forget and leave things out, but it really skews, Mercury throughout the population. And as he points out here with the French, Mercury was more often transiting from Libra to Pisces than with any of the other signs, which is really interesting, especially when you consider that that's not where the sun was in that first graph. Now we know that in heliocentric astrology, the sun and Mercury, geocentric astrology, the sun and Mercury are never more than 28 degrees from each other. They're always together, often in the same sign. And yet the sun distribution is markedly different from the Mercury distribution. And at first glance, that almost doesn't make sense. However, the problem is because of the retrograde phenomenon. And what happens is, because of Mercury's retrograde period, it's going to spend more time in those signs from Libra to Pisces, moving backwards and stopping and slowing down and turning around again before it gains speed. And that's births. The births pile up during that period. For instance, he shows that Mercury's loop during the 20th century was 57 days when the sun was in Aquarius and only 55 days when the sun was in Leo. We can deduce, therefore, from this phenomenon alone, that people born as Mercury was transiting Aquarius would be more frequent than those born as Mercury was transiting Leo. And that's what this graph is showing us. Here's Aquarius, it's pretty high, and here's Leo, it's pretty low. That's the difference 2 days makes. But there's a lot of births in 2 days. Okay, so Mercury not only doesn't have a flat distribution, not even close, but even though you'd think it would be similar to the distribution of the sun, no, because the sun doesn't go retrograde. And that's the difference. Venus, and I hope you can see the graph here for Venus, actually has one of the most interesting orbital frequencies of any of the planets, because she very consistently carves out this 5-pointed star pattern around the zodiac. And that's something that Nick Collerstrom explored in many interesting ways, over 20 years ago. And as you can see, Venus spends more time in Aquarius, very common in Aquarius. The next most common sign tends to be Virgo. Right here on Aries, Taurus cusp, there is a big bump in Venus's distribution. But along with this 5-pointed star, there's also signs where, Venus is relatively infrequent. For instance, Libra or Capricorn, even Pisces and Aries or Leo. So that's a very significantly unequal distribution, and also a very interesting geometric pattern. The next one we want to look at is the Mars distribution. And I hope you can see this graph here. Again, due to its retrograde loop, Mars has a very uneven distribution in the zodiac, and it's quite consistent. You get the highest number of Mars positions in Leo and Virgo, and then it drops off in other parts of the zodiac, including Pisces and Aries. Again, that's very useful to know. For instance, if you have a sample and the majority of them show a bump in Pisces, Mars in Pisces, you might want to follow that up. For instance, in our head coaches, our NFL and NBA head coaches distribution, we found much higher numbers of Mars in Capricorn, which turned out to be quite significant. So again, these frequencies can really help you. You know, it doesn't mean that you can't show an astrological effect. It just means you have to be very creative in how you do it. Next, we want to look at Jupiter. Here's the graph for the Jupiter distribution. And that's quite a figure. So you can see that due to its retrograde cycles, and again, it's perihelion versus aphelion when it's, you know, moving faster or slower depending on, you know, how close it is to the sun. There's quite a lot of variation in the distribution of Jupiter. However, you tend to get your highest distributions toward the end of the zodiac, particularly Scorpio. Jupiter is very fond of Scorpio, as Didier Castille puts it. The third decan of Scorpio is the most represented decan, and it's 63% higher than the frequency of the first decan of Taurus, opposite, which is the least represented decan. So again, it doesn't mean that you can't show an astrological effect with Jupiter, but you do have to compensate for and control for these frequencies. They can also help you. And the last planet we want to look at here is our good friend Saturn. And again, I hope that you can see the chart here. And again, it's nothing like an equal distribution. It's very lopsided, and it's very much favoring, again, the latter part of the zodiac, particularly Sagittarius and its own sign, Capricorn. So you do want to be aware of that. I remember when I first did my NFL head coaches, they had so much Saturn and Capricorn. I got terribly excited about that until reality set in. You know, that's just the way it is with Saturn. Now, of course, when you get to Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, you've got a completely different problem there. And you're getting close to that problem with Saturn, namely that the planets, the outer planets, move so slowly through the signs that, as we always say, their effect is more generational. And that's true in their distribution. Your Uranus by sign is more reflective of, you know, the birth year, the birth cohort, so to speak. And that's true as well of Neptune and Pluto. It's very difficult to do any kind of quantitative astrological analysis with those planets by sign. Okay, for the obvious reasons. So again, don't get too excited if your sample, you know, shows them peaking in a couple of signs and non-existent in others. It's just astronomical, and it's generally better with those if you're looking for sign effects that you look elsewhere, because those three planets are not particularly helpful. No, but at the same time, if you're looking at them in terms of, you know, house distribution, or, you know, whether they're close to the angles or not, well then that could be useful. You know, that's going to be more random and more of an even distribution. Now, I'm about to wrap up and open up the floor to questions, but again, I want to end on an encouraging note, because these astronomical frequencies can help you every bit as much as they can hurt you, if you know how to use them creatively. There's nothing here that's saying that there's no point researching planets and signs. No, I would completely disagree. And while there have been many futile attempts to research planets in zodiac signs, there have been a number of attempts that were particularly well designed, let's say. But at the same time, especially in recent years, we are starting to get results that show the effect of the zodiac signs. But you need to plan those kind of experiments carefully. And to end on that, I just want to share with you one of my own projects. Not that I'm necessarily tooting my own horn, but we were able to get results within zodiac signs that are significant and have held up so far. And I want to show you how we did it, just to give you some positive encouragement and ideas going forward in that. So this is a graph, and I don't know if you can read the details, but I think you can see the black and white bar graph. And this is the distribution of a sample of NFL head coaches from the American National Football League. And we took all of the coaches who had ever been head coaches in the National Football League in the Super Bowl era. So that's a very kind of distinct cutoff point that we chose. So that started at, I think, 1967 through the present day. And we separated them out into the ones who had won championships and the ones who never won championships. So that's a pretty clear distinction. And then we compared the planetary positions between the two groups to see if there were any significant differences or, you know, God forbid, complementary, contrasting differences between the two groups. And in fact, there were very significant differences. Now, one of the things that I particularly enjoyed about this experiment is that we weren't actually working with a data sample. You know, we weren't sampling a population and trying to get a representative sample. We're working with a complete data set and comparing within the complete data set, which I find very satisfying myself. And then it becomes, you know, less a matter of, well, how many are in it, but just that it's completed and that it's showing differences. And that certainly did. And this is the distribution of the Sun, Mars, and Jupiter between the signs of the zodiac. Now they're arranged from Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, etc. To Pisces. These are the champions on the top, and you have the same arrangement: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc. through Pisces on the bottom. These are the non-champions, and of course that's a much bigger set, 168 versus, I believe, 54 champions. But right away you see the champions are very high in Capricorn with the Sun, Mars, and Jupiter, and for the non-champions that's their lowest sign. At the same time, the champions are very low here in Gemini and Cancer, and for the non-champions, that's actually their highest signs. And that's proven to be very significant. And again, when you break it down to elements, not the modalities that John was recommending, and he's been using, you know, the modalities with some success. Here we broke it down to elements, and the elements gave us even better results. So I just want to put that in there to encourage you that it doesn't mean that you can't get results from studying planets and zodiac signs. You've just got to be creative in how you organize your study. And for me, that's the fun part of research. So I will stop there. And I'm happy to entertain any questions or feedback from this point on. Mitch, you got anything to add to that?
Is the DDA article available on the web?
It has been included in a link with an abstract in the last like 5 newsletters.
Okay.
Okay, so everybody's got the link to that in their newsletters. Like read it. Okay. So, yeah, everybody's got that, and his article's got a couple of other of his articles linked to that. So if that should get you into the DDA Castile mode, and again, I strongly recommend that you try to read everything that he's got on the web. It's all really good.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments moving forward on any of that material? Because we're here for you. Try us. I know Faith was asking you, Mitch, about sample sizes. She actually sent him what I think is a really good fundamental question about you know, what's the right size for a data sample? You know, how many do you need?
Right.
It's kind of daunting. You may not have to get 10,000 charts. Okay, so and Mitch had some good answers for her. If you maybe want to share some of that, Mitch.
Well, one, it depends on the nature of the research. Qualitative research generally has smaller sample sizes than, say, quantitative research. But I've even seen quantitative research done. My mentor, when I was in graduate school, published an article that had like 7 observations in it. It was coal mining accidents in West Virginia. And he managed to get that published in a peer-reviewed journal. He used like 3 variables, so he had like 3 degrees of freedom left over. So it really depends on the nature of the question that you're asking.
Well, and I think, as you said, the idea is for it to be representative. And in fact,
absolutely.
I'm not a mathematician. That's way above my pay grade. But, you know, there are a number of different mathematical analytical procedures that you can use to look at the size of the population that you want to research and then determine what would be a representative sample. And if you consider political polling,
right.
You know, they have to have some idea of how many people they need to talk to and get answers from.
That's right.
In order to consider representative.
There's an equation for that.
Population.
And it depends. And there are different equations depending on the kind of variable that you have. If you have proportions, it's different than if you have a variable like sex or age or something like that, where you're trying to predict age. For example, the formula would be different because it's a quantitative variable that's what we would call an interval level variable, and so the formulas are different. But there are different formulas depending on the nature of the variable. But there are formulas that let you decide what is the margin of error that you're willing to accept, and so.
And now maybe you can get some idea of why I'm so happy to work with a complete data set.
Sure, with population, you don't have to do a significance test. All you have to do is look at the 2 and see whether they're different or not. And if they are, you make an argument that they're different enough.
Hey, and even a non-mathematician like me can do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
As I said before, I don't use a number in lieu of a good argument. And so when you have the population, a significance test is trying to say, is the difference big enough to take into account random sampling error? Well, you don't have any random sampling error when you have the population because you don't have a sample. You have the complete set.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and the process, the procedure that facilitates all of this is that you have a research community and you communicate and you share. That's the whole importance of peer review.
Right.
You know, this idea that, you know, researchers are isolated and introverted and they just work alone. And, you know, it's largely true, particularly in astrology. And like, they don't like to share their stuff with other people because they think they're going to steal it. And that's not what works in every other field. What works is having a community. of researchers who all help and support each other, because we're all wrestling with questions that, you know, maybe we really don't, not only can't answer on our own, but we don't want to try to answer on our own because we're all biased. We're just going to see what we want to see anyways. You know, let's admit it, okay, up front. And in research, then, you know, you have a community, and you share and you peer review and you bounce these ideas off each other, and you send them an email and ask them, and they ask somebody else, and, you know, two heads are better than one. This is a really important part of the whole process of trying to get to some level of objective truth. And it's a big part of why we work so hard here, doing what we do at Canaveral Research to build up that community.
You've got a comment from Robin Biles.
Yeah, do you want to read it, Mitch?
She says, in researching an event such as drowning, which astrologers consider Neptune ruled, and using 300 birth charts with transits for each event, what percentage of hits would be needed to have statistically valid work? 60, 80% without control group.
Why don't you have a control group?
Yeah, you want to have a, well, some models in statistics, we don't have a control group. There are quasi experiments that are just correlational in nature. A lot of research is just correlational in nature and doesn't have a control group.
Robin, is this something that you're doing? Can I put your mic on for a second? I'm gonna try to unmute you, because I have a feeling you must be asking this for some personal reason. Robin, you there? You want to try your mic? Hello, Robin. Testing. I think I've got your mic on. No?
Yeah, you've got her mic on.
Yeah. Oh, you don't? Okay. Okay. She says she doesn't have a mic, but she says she is working on several things. Well, good for you. I'm glad to see you pursuing this. I'm really glad to see you pursuing this, and thank you for bringing it up. I mean, that's a pretty broad question, but in terms of statistically valid, you're going to want to, depending on how you structure it, you're going to want to run a chi-square test or p-values, you know, whatever's more relevant to the question.
Yeah, and the sample of 300, what you get for a stem, what you get for margin of error, for example, I'd have to run that through an equation. So again, it depends on the nature of the variable. It looks like the variable is an interval level variable. Well, it's an event, so it's yes, no, it's dichotomous. What we call a dichotomous variable has just two values, yes, no. True, false. I'd actually have to run that through an equation to calculate what the actual margin of error is. The margin of error is going to be quite large with 300.
No, Faith's got a good comment. She's like, wow, you have 300 charts of drownings? Yeah, well done, Robin. I don't think that just happened by chance. Okay.
No.
Yeah, it takes some effort. That takes some effort, so good job. Good job. But again, you know, Robin, I hope you can make it in on Tuesday nights, because Robin's here in Melbourne. She's practically my neighbor. Okay. So I hope you can make it in on Tuesday nights.
So she's got with biographies.
With biographies. If Neptune rules drownings, then we should see it in plenty of the charts. Well, you know, frankly, why stop at Neptune? You know, I mean, it's a good hypothesis. That's a good starting hypothesis for sure. But you know, maybe it's not Neptune. Maybe we'll find what it is. You know, so, yeah. That's are they timed, or is it just birthdays? But you know, that's an interesting project, Robin. I'm really glad that you brought that up, and you know, we'd certainly be interested in helping you to pursue that with information. You know, it's not necessarily the kind of question that we want to answer right on the spot without some more time and some more work and careful consideration. But it's worthwhile. You know, it's definitely worthwhile. And yeah, I was looking for an answer if they were timed or not. I'd like to take a few minutes because we're at an hour and 15 minutes, and even though I called it the research hour, in my mind I gave it 90 minutes. Just I know how these discussions go, especially if I start talking. But I was going to bring in John again. John is in UK. And he was talking to us about a very interesting study he's doing, and he's using rising signs to do it, using them well, on horse racing. So, John, if you're still in here, did he leave? Oh, there he is, there he is. I'm going to unmute you, and I'm going to try to put your
Hello.
Camera back on there. Okay, you're on, and do you see a little signal for your camera? Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
There you go.
I don't see me, but
I see you.
yes,
I see you.
hello again.
All right. Where did we leave off with your project, John?
Well, I was just giving you background as to where I'm up to. I mean, the project evolves as I find something out and then change what I'm doing. At the moment, I know when certain trainers and jockeys tend to win at certain degrees of a rising sign. There's a new racing season due to start for the winter next month. And I'm considering actually recording not just when they win at a particular degree, but when they lose as well. So I know whether if they win 4 times, it's not 4 times out of 14, it's 4 times out of 4. So that's the next stage where I'm up to. I'm going to find out just how common that particular winning degree is relative to the other times that they race. So
and let me just recap for the group here very quickly. John is looking at horse racing, and he's using, I think, very, very complete data sets of the racing season.
yes, every race is timed.
Every race is timed at the start of the race, and he's looking at the degree of the rising sign and comparing it with the jockeys and trainers for when they win and when they lose. In a nutshell, I hope I'm being clear.
Correct. Yes.
And not only getting some interesting results, but he and his wife are still turning a profit. So yeah, take it from there. Tell us more. It's very interesting.
Well, there's a history to it. I mean, you can read about horse racing in Al-Kindi from 800. John Addy did some research in it about aspects of the fifth house cusp. And American astrologer Joyce Werman from the 1970s and 80s did research of, I think, in Santa Anita race course with regard to the rising sign, and she alluded to some success of that. Again, historically, there's a place called the Irish National Stud that was founded on astrological principles, and there's a statue of Colonel John Walker with his hands up to the stars, and there's horoscope books in the museum, and there's horoscopes for individual horses, and he won the Derby, he rented horses to the kings, and he made a fortune using astrology out of horse racing. So there is some
Where's
history
that museum? Where's that museum?
It's in Kildare in Ireland.
In Meath. Yeah, not Meath, but in Kildare. Kilkenny and Kildare, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Literally,
that's the horse country, yeah.
It's literally where they breed the horses.
Yeah, exactly. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. That's same breeds country.
Yeah, and literally you go in and there's a statue there with him with his hands outraised and a picture of the sky and the stars behind him. The Queen unveiled a statue 3 years ago of the zodiac signs in the middle of the garden because of this astrological connection. And there's a book in the museum of horoscopes for the horses in 1905, I think it is, whether they should keep them or whether they should sell them on the charts, or whether they're going to be champion racers or not. And he made a fortune out of it. So there's a history to it. So we just ended up finding out, is there any success in this? And several years ago, we played around with various methods. Another method is, for example, planets and angles. So, you know, I've been to race meetings with other people. Mars is on the midheaven. There's a horse called What a Warrior, and people wonder why I backed it and why it won. So the curiosity was there. And then it was just a case of taking the research further forward. looking at the different methods, the method that seemed to produce the best results was the ascending degree, which was recordable. You could record a 0 cardinal rising and who won.
Yeah, you've got the timing published, the start of every race. I mean, that's the beauty of doing any kind of sports. You get great stats freely available.
So effectively, I mean, the bigger races, we can't record every one because there's literally so many in a season. You know, there's 10 grades of races, and there can be half a dozen races every day, race meetings every day. So it's 6 times 8 meetings with 10 jockeys, 10 trainers, and the numbers just become too much. But from the better quality races, patterns emerged. And literally, the way to test it, well, the non-astrologers said to us, do you make any money out of it? Can you give us a winner? And the astrologers say, do you make any money out of it? Can you tell us a winner? So we then had to decide to test the methods out. And surprisingly, we were expecting to last a few weeks with a few pounds in an account. And here we are 20 months on, and we've never had to put money back into the account again. And we place the same amount of money in the account, you know, for betting purposes each week, and we're just betting off the profit. So we've now turned a few pounds into a few £1,000s just by using one method. And it's, I'm now at the point of saying, is this just random, or is there something more to it? And I'm looking blind off birth charts, and I'm happy for that to happen at the moment. I'd rather have the answers as to there is a pattern, and then try and equate the patterns back to somebody's birth chart afterwards. So I'm not rushing to find out, even though I know the birth dates of individual jockeys and individual trainers, trying to get the birth times will be near on impossible, I suspect, at this time. You know, they're not celebrities.
No, you got to find what you can work with. No, it's a very, very interesting project, and especially now that you brought in the Irish connection. It really perked up. That's amazing.
Well, just look up Irish National Stud. They acknowledge the astrology exists.
You know, Bill Sheeran told me about this years ago, but I never followed up. You know, in all the years I lived in Ireland, and believe me, I've been to Kildare many times. But and I love the horse country there, but I didn't know there was a museum like that. Now I'm going to have to go. That's really got my attention.
Yeah. So we carry on recording the times and carry on finding out who wins at particular degrees. We then record each jockey, well, most of the major jockeys and the major trainers from birthday to birthday, and see how these results cluster by the 90 different variables of cardinal, mutable, fixed, and the individual degrees. And they do seem to cluster. Certain degrees repeat over the 3 years that we've done it. Certain ones seem to cluster at different points between birthdays. Again, it's early, but I'm thinking that if that pattern starts to repeat every 4 years, after every 4 years, then there's some sort of solar return type of pattern going on. But that's going to be another 2 years before that becomes apparent.
What's your background? I mean, do you have any training in stats, or are you learning as you go along? Or
I'm learning as I go along. I mean, I'm a surveyor by trade, so I do a lot of qualitative judgment day in, day out. That's the nature of what I do. So I can think in terms of quality, because I have to put a value on everything that goes on on a daily basis. So that way of thinking doesn't concern me particularly. It's just whatever information do I need to do to try and put more meat on the bones. That's what I'm trying to think of as to, I've come so far with it, it seems to be working. There seems to be patterns starting to emerge. But do I need to do anything else from the data set that I've got to start sparking interest to say there's something more to this than what's on the surface, and that other than I seem to be getting more money out of it than I was expecting to do.
Yeah, and I mean, the idea of organizing it for some kind of publication comes to mind. At the same time, I think there are possibly other options there, and I'm really curious in Mitch's thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, my thought is, again, the absence of a control group, controlling for the astronomical frequencies versus the astrological frequencies.
Okay, yeah, I mean, a control group is always a good idea. And yeah, you know, John, on the one hand, I mean, we're here to listen to you and you know, try to get our heads around what you're doing so that we can offer you some kind of constructive, you know, support or help along the way. And we're building research groups. You may hear from some of these people over the coming weeks and see what comes in. But I think, you know, in anything, you want to start with a goal, an end in mind. And normally when people are doing, you know, some kind of research, they're looking at publication, they're looking at a journal article or some kind of publication. Again, with your project,
I'm not too concerned about publication. I'm just concerned whether it works, and to show it with astrologers to say there is some merit in this. I don't have an end goal. I just feel as if I'm just going along with the flow of things. If you'd asked me that question 3 years ago, I would have said maybe it might last 3 or 4 weeks. They might fall flat on its face. It's just the fact that it's carried on going for so long that all of a sudden the questions now arise, well, where do I take this now? I just don't quite know what I'm doing, because you know, yesterday wasn't a particularly good day, but we earned as much money as we spent. We stood still.
Okay, now Prashant is chiming in saying, hi, John, where can I get more info? This is an amazing start. And he's in Mumbai. That's what I said. You're going to hear from more of these people. And I would say in terms of next steps.
I have another question, Courtney.
And I'm going to finish up real quick, and we'll go to you, Mitch. What Mitch is saying is true about the control group. If you're concerned with showing what works, you want to look at some standard methodological procedures for establishing genuine significance, and make sure, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, that stuff is in place, so that when you say you're showing what works, again, the skeptics, they're going to come at you with knives, and you need to be prepared. And we're certainly here to help you with that. Good. Your turn, Mitch.
Well, I had another question, which is the timing. The time data is the events, the time of the horse race, not the date of birth of the jockey or the trainer.
Correct.
Because you can't get you don't have time data for them.
No, we can get the birthday, but not the time.
Right, so you can't do ascendant on them because you don't know what the ascendant sign is for the jockey or the trainer.
Correct. Yes.
No, but I've done so much work in sports. I'm telling you, the real-time charts that he's using, I don't want to say they're better than Bert data, but you know, they're right up there. Yeah, he's actually chosen a really important variable. Really important.
Well, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not quite sure what a control group would be formed as, so I'm completely blank on that.
Mitch?
With regard to criticism or not, it's like, okay, it doesn't work, but I'm still making money out of it. I'm not too concerned, really.
Well, no, let's go for both. I mean, let's go for statistical significance along with making money on it, and then like you've hit a home run. You know? But what would constitute a control group, Mitch? I mean, just off the top, this is all off the top of our head.
Yes.
We haven't even seen the paper. Right. I mean, what constitutes
the control group would look at similar data for randomly selected dates, times. As you mentioned, you know, the shuffling of dates and times. Jigsaw will do that, for example, so that you have a control group that is reflecting the astronomical frequencies.
Yeah, that you're using the same time frame of the race season, right. But it's almost as if, well, let's see what would happen to this jockey if in fact his races were at different times.
Right.
You know, and that's the random.
Yes. Well, that's why I'm going to record when they lose as much as when they win. So if let's say they never win at fixed degrees, and they race 50% of the races at fixed degrees, and yet they win at mutable and cardinal degrees, then I'll have that information. So that's the next stage I was proposing to go on to.
Yeah, if you can do some version of a complete data set where you're comparing every time they win with every time they lose for a period of time, then you've made it easier.
Yeah, that's the next stage, because whilst I've been interested to know that somebody say, you know, I know somebody wins at 3 degrees cardinal and 100% of the races, they've raced at 3 degrees cardinal, but it's only a small number of races in a season. What I'm trying to find out is if they've run 2 times at 5 degrees fixed, whether they've raced 25 times at 25 degrees fixed. And that's the bit of the information I don't have. But because the
if you can set parameters and get complete data sets between point A and point B,
that's possible to do on one set of race meetings, which is due to start next month, which is smaller winter racing. So there's one race meeting a day, effectively, with a limited number of jockeys between the north of the country and the south of the country. I can do that. It becomes a manageable data set. Whilst at the moment, there's 6 meetings a day sometimes in England, and there's 2 or 3 meetings in Ireland.
Mm-hmm. But this is a creative part of research, you know, creating a manageable data set that's doable, you know, and again, for me, that's the fun part. That's the creative part.
Just to answer Prashant's questions, literally, I just record them on an Excel spreadsheet. That's all we do. Record the races so I can then isolate who wins at a certain time and the information's there in front of me. Rather than looking at the stars like the Babylonians did and writing it on a cuneiform text, I just recorded an event chart and write it down on an Excel spreadsheet, and the answers are there immediately in front of me. You know, once I've got the data, it takes me a matter of seconds to work out who's won when, because it's instant. So effectively, the race meeting tomorrow, if it starts at 6 degrees mutable, I can tell you now who wins at 6 degrees mutable, and if they're in that race, that's the selection. It's as quick as that.
Yeah, I would really like to see a complete data set on that, because right off the top of my head, I'm saying, but if the race starts at 6 degrees mutable, and today, you know, Saturn is making a ugly wobbly square to that 6 degrees mutable, this might not be their day, you know?
Yeah.
So I would really like to see the data. I think it's exciting. I think it's a really exciting project. And, you know, we're here for you. And these things don't happen overnight. But thank you for bringing this in. And again, I think you'll get, you know, all kinds of different support and interest throughout the year as you pursue it. But yeah, let's pursue it in a manner that's manageable.
Well, hopefully by next March, April time, when this winter season finishes, I'll have a data set on who wins when and who loses when. So I'll be able to compare if they raced 5 times and won 5 times at a particular degree, or whether they raced 5 times and never won at a particular degree, and to see if anything jumps out on that data set. So that's the next project, because the current season's coming to an end because of the time of year that it is. You know, they stop running on grass and they start running on all weather surfaces.
Right. We'll get, and we're at the 90-minute mark. So fine. I'm going to bring this like to a close, but I really enjoyed this session this morning. I hope that everybody else did. And so Robin, yeah.
Because just look up the Irish National Stud. That's all I'd say.
Oh, I'm going to kill you. I'll be there next summer. Yeah. And thanks for reminding me of that. Because like I said, Bill Sheeran told me that years ago, and I never followed up on it. Robin has come back. Yeah, we were waiting to hear from you, Robin. She says, mine was a hypothetical math statistical question. How else would astrologers know that Neptune rules drownings without actually seeing it in a majority? How else would astrologers know that Neptune rules drownings? Well, Robin, that is the $50 million question. How do they know these things that they claim to know? Oh my, that's kind of a mystery. And she's saying like Carter's accident charts. Okay, so it's a hypothetical question, like maybe she doesn't have the data. Oh, okay, a hypothetical statistical question. Yeah, well, so again, I think we covered a lot of the hypotheticals there. You know, you're going to organize the experiment, and depending on how you ask it, use some kind of a control group and get some p-values or a chi-squared or whatever is most relevant to the question. But see, I think you've raised a point. How do astrologers know what they claim to know? That's a really good question, because again, the skeptics are out there saying that we don't.
Yeah, thinking more of her question about statistical significance, for the margin of error for the mean of something, we would need the mean value, the average value of it, and we'd need the standard deviation. That's how we determine those are the two pieces of information that would be needed in order to determine margin of error.
Yeah, that's a standard procedure as well. Okay, so I think what you're saying, she doesn't exactly have the data, but she's asking good questions. And I hope we'll see you back on the Tuesday. I hope we see everybody on the first Tuesday in October. Also, don't forget East Meets West is coming up the first Saturday in October, and we will be rolling out the full membership and education program. And I hope you will support us. You know. Another question we want to ask is who supports astrological research in every other field? You know, the research is very well supported, and if we really want to move astrology forward, you know, we do need to support the people that are doing this work. It's hard work. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of investment, and I think if we work together as a field, we can do great things. So when we do roll out the membership program, I hope you'll join us and join in. And we also want to see you at the Kepler conference at the beach in January. You'll never regret it. Thank you again, Mitch, and for everybody that came and joined in. I think it was a great kickoff meeting, and we'll see you guys the next time. This will be recorded and posted, so be patient. We'll put it out there for you. Okay.